Je veux dire, bonsoir.
Okay. We are gonna share
I don't know if anybody told you all. If you say bonjour to a French person and
There
it's
we
very much
go.
later than 5, if it's after
And
6,
I
then
will
for
try
sure
not to forget to
they
keep an eye on the
very
dialogue box
likely
to
might
see
look
if
at you and
anybody
very pointedly say
has joined
bonsoir,
in.
reminding
I'm
you that it's
gonna
evening
put that
and
over
you're supposed
like
to say
that, 'cause
bonsoir
then I think
when
I can
it's
still
evening.
see.
Brianna's
Well,
here!
I'll pull it out if somebody else comes in. How about that?
Yay!
So, ce soir, we don't have as much to do this week as we had last week.
Just getting started.
A couple of announcements,
I pulled
which
up the
if
stuff,
you've
but
looked
I
at
couldn't
the
find it all
news
of a
item
sudden. There
on
we go.
GoView, you already
Oh,
know.
and I'm still on the page
but just to
from
remind you, I
102,
am getting
so
caught up.
just 1 second.
The composition module will be there, will be available by tomorrow night, or at least by Thursday morning. The quizzes, the quiz for you guys in 102 will be available sometime tomorrow night.
Ça va, Brianna?
And I'll set up WebSam tonight, and tonight and tomorrow I'll try to get all of the PowerPoints and scripts and links put in the right place. We have things in a slightly different order than
Oui, je vais assez bien.
the class was set up for.
Sauf
So
que je suis attardée avec
I'm
tout
having
mon
to
travail,
split
aside from
lessons up a
being
little tiny bit as we go.
behind on everything.
But anyway, there
I'm
may
sure
be
it's
some
driving you guys
overlap occasionally,
crazier
but
than
just
it's
don't worry
driving
about
me,
it.
although it is driving me crazy.
I think that's about it.
Mais oui,
So thanks for bearing with me. I will also be digging back into email tonight. Most of the emails that I saw and wasn't able to go ahead and respond to had been answered with my big message yesterday. But if yours was not answered, don't worry, I will get to you. And if there's some graded component, depending on you hearing back from me, don't worry, we will adjust something so that that doesn't count against you.
You're going to have the one from last week
as long as you
and the
wrote to
one
me,
for this week.
you know,
The
in
one
good
from
time
last week
and
will
in
be
good faith.
considered extra
But
credit.
if you're waiting on me,
so
you won't
if you
be
want to do it, you can.
penalized for
and
my
it will
slowness
likely
at
help
getting
your average
back
because
to
you'll
everybody.
have one more quiz that would count in your drops.
Voilà.
Or that would be
Ce soir, on va
eligible
faire
for your drops.
5B, 5B1.
And since it's at the beginning of the semester,
about the weather.
It's likely to be a slightly higher grade than possibly some of your quizzes later in the semester. That's just usually what happens with people's grades.
A way less intense
in
week,
a cumulative
knowledge
course like ours.
You will notice that on WebSam this week you will have some video activities.
You are welcome to take it or not
didn't
take
give you any
it.
video
It won't
activities
be due
last
until
week
the
because there was so much
also. And then the one for
structural
this week
stuff to cover, and I
is
wanted
not
to
optional,
be sure and practice that.
and
But this week there will be a few video
it's due on
activities,
Sunday
so be sure and
well.
be keeping up on the video.
Oh wait,
You
January's
won't
only got
always,
30 days. It's due the
be able to
first.
do video
Okay,
activities.
they're both
There's
due the
just
first.
maybe 2 other weeks.
Extra
I
credit
think,
is
this
always
semester
good.
where you have
That's a very good point.
3
brought up by
sections to
Brianna.
do, and those weeks we probably won't do.
So
video
anyway, those
activities
2
either.
quizzes, we're doing stuff in a slightly different order
Voilà.
than
Vous allez tourner s'il vous
we
plaît à la
normally
page
do with this course,
196
which
ou bien
is partly
simplement
why
regarder
it's
avec
taking me so long
moi
to get
parce
each
que je
module
l'ai
up,
déjà
because I kind of
ouvert.
forgot
Bon, j'ai pas
that I had to
ouvert,
mix and
mais je
match
l'ai
some
mis.
of the lesson halves.
Voilà.
But
Alors,
I will get on
and
top
I will
of that.
zoom
But that's
in
why
in
it's
a
going to take a
couple
little bit
minutes
longer for the
here.
quizzes,
It
because I have to
doesn't
break up a few quizzes and
give
kind
us
of
very many
jigsaw a couple others
choices for
together and
zooming
create
in,
some new
but
sections and stuff. Anyway, that's
bon,
my job,
ben,
and that's
il faut se
wonderful, because
débrouiller,
I
hein. We
actually
have
like
to
making
just
quizzes. So,
deal with it. So,
that will be done tomorrow night at the
voilà.
latest.
I'm gonna zoom in, and maybe that
on
will help
WebSam,
you guys. Alors,
also what will follow tomorrow and the
pas.
next day is
Oh,
I'll
it's not
get
gonna
your
let me
PowerPoints
zoom
and your scripts and
with my
everything linked.
handy keyboard command.
And
Thought it let me
I
last
will
week.
eventually remember to go put the
Obviously it
links
didn't,
on
and I'm
last
just
week's as
remembering it
well. I
wrong.
know a couple of you wanted text linked back
voilà.
there, so I'll do that too.
I will try to get
what
the
I started to say
Camtasia video
about
more
WebSam
clear
is
this week.
that last week you might have noticed.
So
Oh, it
hopefully
does?
that will be the case.
Wait, Saturday?
And if you need to make this bigger on your
I'm so
screen, you should be able to zoom in
That's so weird.
a little bit.
You changed my
if you're
whole
watching the
worldview
recording
there,
later.
Brianna, but that's okay. I'll get over it.
Or make the video on YouTube if you want to.
Anyway, the
hopefully I
websim,
was
last week
successful
we
at
didn't
making
do
it
any
not
activities that
blurry
were
or not
based
as
on the
blurry.
video because we just
Voilà.
had so
So
much
I'm talking
material
a
to
lot
get
in
through.
English. On va
We
faire un
only
peu de
have a
français
few
maintenant,
of
non?
those weeks.
Alors,
Most
quel temps
weeks will be more like
fait-il?
this week where you just have a couple of
Up where I
tranches,
live in
a
South
couple of
Carolina,
slices of
I'm
stuff
right
to
outside
do.
Clemson, South Carolina, and it actually looked like
Next
this
week,
last week
this
for
week
us.
that is,
So
since we only
il a
have
neigé la
two
semaine
sections
dernière
of
ici.
stuff, you will have
Jeudi,
a
ou je veux
few
dire
video
vendredi,
activities in your
samedi,
websam group,
pour la
so don't be
plupart.
surprised about that.
Et
And
voilà,
on
je ne
those
sais
rare weeks where
pas
we do
quelle
have
température on
3
avait,
chunks of
etc. Mais
stuff to get
il
through,
faisait quand même frisqué,
you should still
which you
look at
won't
the
see in
video
your
that
vocab
week so
list,
that you
but
can
that's what
keep
French
up
people
with
say
what's going on in the
sometimes. They're
video.
going to say, oh,
So anyway, we'll talk a little bit about the
ça
video
fait
again
frisqué, il fait
in a little
frisqué.
while.
Alors, the one
je
thing
pense que
about the
c'était
weather
tout.
expressions
I think
is
that's,
that you have a lot of
I'll be getting back
expressions
to
that can
emails
only be
as well.
expressed one way.
There were
You'll notice
a
a
bunch
bunch
of
of
emails that I
expressions where
didn't
you can use
answer
faire,
yet
et c'est
because
toujours
they
avec il,
asked things
singulier,
that were
il
answered
fait,
in
just
my
like we
big
would say,
huge note
it
that
is
I
nice
sent
out,
you all
it
last night.
is 30 degrees
So,
or whatever.
if you're one
so
of
it's
the
always
people
with
that
third
is
person
still waiting
singular,
on an answer that wasn't
masculin,
answered
il.
there,
Then you have certain expressions that
then
use
please
être.
stand by. And
And you have
please don't
certain
worry
expressions
if
where
you
you
asked
have a
a question
specific
about
verb
something
of its own, like il
that a
neige.
grade is depending on. As
So
long as you wrote me
the
in
best
time,
thing for these is
we'll
to
adjust
keep
your
them
grade.
intact.
You're not going to be penalized
and
because it
use
is taking me a
them
long
in their
time to get back to
entirety
everybody.
each
So
time
please
you're
don't worry.
practicing with them.
Don't forget, I have power.
The best way to cement
and
anything
if
is
we
to
need
create with
adjust
that
something, or if some
component.
quiz is wacky,
That's not going to be
or
as easy to
whatever,
do with
we can
these
handle it.
because you can't take as many
Voilà.
liberties with these expressions as you
on va
can with a lot of the stuff that we do.
à la page
But still using them
372
in
avec
your
le
homework, of
vocabulaire
course,
de
and
la
you'll be
table.
needing to use them a bit in your
Again,
voice
those of
board
you that are
and in your
watching the
discussion board.
video, hopefully
So
this week it will
really
be
try to use them
clearer.
as they are here.
I learned a couple of tricks for
You can
Camtasia
exchange
that should
some of
help
the
the
words at
export
the
be
end
clearer.
of il fait, you see.
And you should be able to zoom in on this then on YouTube. If you're watching it on Blackboard,
using them over and over
Collaborate,
will be your best way of
the way it refreshes is kind of
cementing
wacky.
them.
So it's clearer,
Alors,
but the
on
refresher
allait parler
thing
des
is just
mois,
weird.
plutôt.
So anyway,
Pour tous
we'll
les
do the best we
mois,
can with the
c'est
recordings.
assez simple. Décembre, janvier, août.
Pour
Décembre,
le
janvier,
vocabulaire de la
février,
table,
l'hiver,
des
winter,
dîners,
n'est-ce
des
pas?
repas, etc.
Puis vous avez l'été,
One
summer,
cool thing
oui.
is that
Juin,
you
juillet,
don't have
août.
very many new
Août
verbs.
is
You
wacky.
don't have any
You can
irregular
say
verbs coming
you
up
can
this
say
week.
août,
You have
can
a
say
couple of new
out.
verbs that are just
All
yours,
three
like
are
goûter,
accepted.
to taste something.
Where
There was
I used to
another
live,
one that I
we
saw
said août.
earlier.
So you're going to hear me say août, and you can keep saying août if you want to, or one of
commander.
those other
So
possibilities.
to order something in a restaurant
So
or
it's
somewhere.
kind of regional, except that I don't
commander.
know where they say août, and
everything
I don't know where
else,
they say
almost
août.
everything else is just nouns.
Where I used to live in Tours,
and a
in
lot of it
Loire Valley,
has
août.
little pieces that are kind of cognate-y,
Voilà.
like mayonnaise,
that's
crème,
the hardest month to say, so I don't think we need to go
etc.
over too
That
much
might help
more
you to remember what they are.
pronunciation.
And a couple things
I
are
hope
totally
you
different
all
than
know
what we
how
think.
to find your vocab list on
I was doing a crossword the other day, and it said,
where you can
what comes between salad and dessert? And the answer was entrée.
Sound bites.
That's
so
not
that
the case in
repeat
France.
the words to yourself.
And entrée en France, c'est la première chose que tu manges. Ah, salut Joseph! Il y a quelqu'un d'autre maintenant.
Alors,
Yay!
ce qu'on va faire
Joseph is
d'abord,
here.
c'est de regarder
Alors,
un tout petit peu plus
ça va
pour
Joseph?
les saisons et les temps qu'il fait dans les saisons. Alors ici, on n'avait pas parlé du temps. En été, il fait chaud.
C'est super.
Il fait du soleil.
Voilà. So there were a couple of announcements at the beginning, Joseph, but I'll be repeating those at the end, so never fear.
En hiver, il fait froid.
Là, on était en train de parler du vocabulaire ici.
Pour la plupart.
Alors,
peut-être chez vous, non, n'est-ce pas? Chez vous, il fait un peu plus frais que d'habitude, mais il va pleuvoir peut-être plus que normal, mais sinon, il va pas faire super froid, non? Alors, au printemps, mars, avril, May. Mars is one of the few words where we pronounce the final S, so that one you might put a little star by as you're practicing your pronunciation too. Il pleut,
pieces of melon wrapped with little
Elle a, puisqu'il pleut, elle a son imperméable et son parapluie, n'est-ce pas?
A little dab of
Alors,
mustard and
I keep
mayonnaise in the
forgetting
middle,
that I can't scroll the normal way.
or some kind of fun sauce
En
drizzled on
automne,
it.
septembre,
Things like
octobre,
that are
novembre,
more
vous
or less
avez le
vegetable-y,
temps nuageux, n'est-ce pas?
or maybe something
Il fait
just
du
a little
vent,
bit of crudité, just a
the wind
little
is
bit of
blowing,
some kind of cold
et
cut
il fait
or
frais,
ham or something on
n'est-ce
it.
pas?
But a very
Une
small
chose que
little
j'allais mentionner en
amuse-bouche,
fait,
comme on dit.
ils avaient fait
And then you go on
ici,
to the plat principal. So that's your main
ils vous ont
dish.
donné,
Un hors d'oeuvre.
il fait bon.
You don't hear people really talking about hors
can use
d'oeuvre
that
that
to say the
much.
weather is
I
good or
know we say
warm.
hors d'oeuvre a
You
lot,
can actually use
and
it
it
in
seems like
almost
it's a really
any
French
kind of
thing,
weather.
but
If you're having an unseasonably warm
Un hors
day
d'œuvre.
or a
hors
nice
d'oeuvre,
day
très bien.
for whatever season.
Alors,
So if it's in the middle of winter and there's just a really pretty
I
day
almost
where
don't
maybe
remember
it's a little bit
in France,
warmer than
any of my
normal,
French friends ever
but
serving
still not
anything and
warm
calling
by
it an
most
hors
people's
d'oeuvre.
standards, you can
Mais
say il fait
voilà.
bon.
Ça se peut,
So,
quand même. It might arrive one
that
of
one's a
these
little
days
more
when you're over
flexible.
there.
All the others,
Alors, à
use them
table,
as they're
c'est
translated,
comment,
and that's
quand
your
on
best bet.
appelle toute la famille pour venir à la
Alors, on allait
table pour
faire
s'asseoir, n'est-ce
aujourd'hui
pas?
un peu à l'écoute.
Compris.
Oh, d'abord, on
Wanted to talk
va
about this a
parler
little
des
bit.
fêtes.
Most of the time when you're going to see this is with service compris.
We're going to be playing with
which
numbers today.
where's my
For
little
the
impromptu
months and the
blackboard?
dates, you don't need very big
We were
numbers.
doing
We're doing the
numbers in
numbers from
102.
101 and
Bet
higher.
you missed that.
But for months,
Quand tu
the biggest number
vois
you're going to need
service,
is 30 or 31, right?
compris.
So,
on a menu
when we talk about the
or
date,
possibly
we
on your
use
receipt or something,
an ordinal number.
because
So
normally the tip is included pretty much
premier
everywhere.
is the same as our saying
most of the
first.
time, people
D'accord?
still leave
Now we do
just
that
a
all the
couple
way
euro
through the month.
on the table.
In French, you
and
only
it's
do
more
it
of
for
a
the first day.
gesture than
C'est le
anything
1er
else.
octobre, c'est le 1er
I
janvier,
never saw
c'est le
any
1er
French people
août,
leave more than
ou quoi que
5
ce soit,
euro,
n'est-ce
maybe
pas?
for a big dinner
Then when
or
you go
something.
on with
And
the
it's
other
just
dates,
kind of a
you're
little
just going to
extra
say
gesture
the
to
numbers
say
normally. So c'est le
that
2
you really
mai,
appreciated the
c'est le
service and
15
everything.
mars. We would still translate it,
But it
the
really
way we're
doesn't
gonna say
matter
it.
how much it
But
is,
in French, you don't
because
have to
that's
keep
all it
using the
is. It's
ordinal.
just
You
kind
can
of a
just,
little,
you're just going to use it with the
a
first
little
of the month.
acknowledgement,
D'accord?
because they're going to get their tip
On va
anyway,
parler
and
des
they're
fêtes
paid
françaises, je pense.
minimum wage for waiters and waitresses
Alors, on
in
va aller
France is
sur
considerably
la,
higher
le
than here.
texte pour voir.
A lot of people are waiters as their
Comment ils ont fait?
career, and
Très bien.
are, you know,
Et ça, je pense
excellent
que je peux faire le zoom
waiters
plus...
their whole life long.
Ouais, voilà.
So,
Yay,
if we have
let's
time,
resume
got a
when
couple
we're
more
doing
things to
activities
talk
at
about
least.
with
Alors, pour la
restaurant
fête nationale
service a little bit later. I actually waited tables in France
vous allez donner,
for 2 summers
comme dans le livre,
in hotels.
on va parler de la
And it was
date
very interesting.
de chaque fête.
I had waited tables in
Alors,
the States
fête,
already,
you may
so
have
it was
learned
kind of
before
cool.
means party. It also means a holiday. It can also
if we
mean
had time, we'll talk
holiday
about
in
that
the
a little
less
more.
j'arrive pas à le faire
Official
glisser.
sense.
So it can mean a holiday as in a calendar holiday.
Voilà.
It can also mean
Alors,
a
ce qu'on
holiday
allait
like, oh, we took
faire,
a holiday this weekend. We went to the beach.
So as I said, most of this is just going to be memorization. Voilà.
Use them in sentences, especially if you're using them in your own original
de
sentences. You'll get a chance to do that on the voice board and the discussion boards.
Alors, vous pouvez bien sûr faire ça.
That's the best way to cement stuff, is to actually use it while you're creating your own sentences. Now, of course, WebSam is going to help you also, and even if it's just a fill-in-the-blank activity, it will still help you. Ensemble.
So
Alors, pour
just
la
keep
fête
working on
nationale
it,
française,
they'll start sinking in
ce que je vais
slowly,
faire,
petit à petit.
Alors, ce qu'on va faire, c'est de regarder, faire un petit tableau, n'est-ce pas? Et
So do a little
on va y
impromptu
aller sur le
blackboard here,
texte,
so that you have the dates.
ou
I
bien
don't know how
sur
interested you are
WebSam,
in
quoi,
the
sur
dates,
le...
but we will
C'est quasiment WebSam, mais voilà.
give them to you
Alors,
regardless.
ça c'est juste une petite
Alors, pour numéro
révision
un,
pour le vocabulaire.
la fête nationale
As I said, you got a lot of
française. Do you know when
cognates,
the
so
French Independence Day is?
you may be able to figure out some of these
The
just
day they
by
stormed
guessing
the
what kind of
Bastille,
looks like
n'est-ce pas?
looks like the
The
English
14th
word.
of July.
Some of them
Alors,
you
en français,
probably
on va
have
dire
seen a
le
little bit anyway in
14
passing.
juillet. D'accord? Exactement comme ça. And as I said, you're not going to need
the chapter
the
where we
ordinal number.
talked
You're just going to use the normal number.
boutiques
And if I'm translating this, I'm going to say the 14th
a while ago, so
of July.
you'll probably remember some of that.
Alors, c'est dans quelle saison
if not,
ça? Le 14 juillet.
Okay. This week is your chance to start looking at it.
Alors,
pour manger de la soupe,
voilà.
again, if you're watching the
Alors,
video,
c'est dans
you
quelle
may
saison?
want to pause
Le 14 juillet.
So that you can give yourself a chance to guess the answer.
L'indépendance des États-Unis.
Joseph,
Alors ça c'est beaucoup plus facile.
Yell out
Je
the
sais pas si vous
answer
savez.
or type it in, whatever if you
Bien
like.
sûr, c'est
And I'll give you
le
a second
4
so that
juillet.
you've got a chance
Et
to
on
do
sait
that.
déjà que c'est l'été
Alors,
aussi.
numéro 1, pour manger de la
That one's
soupe,
going to be summer also,
qu'est-ce qu'on
of course.
utilise? Une
Poisson
fourchette,
d'avril.
une cuillère,
April Fool's Day in France. Poisson d'avril.
De la soupe. Il y a deux choses
If you
ici
go
qui
to
vont
school
pas
in
marcher
France,
avec
you
la
might
soupe.
have somebody stick
Voilà,
a
une
paper
cuillère,
fish on your
n'est-ce
back.
pas?
Hopefully they
Très
won't
bien.
stick a real fish on your
On
back.
sert la soupe dans une assiette,
Mais
carafe,
they might stick
un bol,
a paper fish on your back.
une assiette.
They do play
un bol,
jokes on
très
each other
bien,
too a little
super.
bit.
Alors, I
not to the
digress a
extent,
lot.
I don't
I'm going to
think
go
that
ahead and digress. I'm going to do a purpose.
We really don't
a
too
digress,
much anymore.
an on-purpose digression.
Not
Is
like
it
we
still
did
a
when I was
digression
little,
if it's
for
on
example.
purpose?
So that was a long
what I
time
wanted
ago.
to say is that it's really not a bol. You can say
Alors,
bol
pour
because the
numéro
book
3,
is telling you to say
Poisson d'avril
bol.
alors? C'est en avril, bien sûr.
Well.
So what am I going to do since it's the first of the month?
This is
Now
more or
I have
less
to
the
use my
shape of a
ordinal.
bowl that you would have
Le
soup
premier
or potage
and I'm
in,
just going
and
straight
they
to
do
the
have
month.
soup
I don't have
with
to say
almost
of
every dinner.
January or
They
whatever.
don't always have soup at lunch,
Et puis,
but
c'est en quelle
family
saison
dinner in
le
the evening,
1er
usually
avril?
you have a soup course. And
C'est
it's
au
normally
printemps,
just
n'est-ce pas?
something
C'est
that's
printemps.
kind of
Noël.
like a pureed
Alors
vegetable
ça c'est
soup or
facile,
something
bien
pretty
sûr,
light.
c'est l'eau.
Maybe just with some butter or garlic in
So
it. And
if you're
they're
watching the video,
always
you might pause each
scrumptious.
time
So
to give
anyway,
yourself a chance
it's a very
to figure
fun
out how
way
to say it in
to
French.
start your meal.
Theoretically,
but
everybody
it's not really
should have
called a
reviewed
bol.
their numbers.
The bol
Coming into this chapter, I'm sorry,
you
I
would
forgot
see
to
if you went
remind
and asked someone in a store
if
for
you
a
want to go
bol,
review those.
would
Hey,
be
Laura's here.
those coffee bowls that you may have
Can
seen
you
where
hear me,
people have
Laura?
cafe au lait. And
Hi,
it's
Laura.
shaped more like our cereal bowls. A bol like this, we don't say a bol,
je vais continuer
actually we
let her
say
catch
une
up.
assiette à soupe.
So anyway, if you have a chance before you dig into your websam this week, go and review your numbers from 1 to 100, and that should help you with all these dates and everything.
Une assiette à
Laura,
soupe.
tu m'entends?
So
Can
it's
you hear
kind of
me, Laura?
like sometimes people call them pasta bowls. They're really big, shallow bowls, and that's usually what you'll get your soup in.
Push your microphone button if you want to talk, or you're welcome.
Anyway,
Oh, yay,
it's not
goody goody.
Really
okay, I'm going to move it
you
over
can go
since
ahead and call
somebody's
it
here
that
now.
since the book is
I
going to
moved it way over so that it wouldn't get in the way.
But,
oh, that's too bad.
Bol,
and you can do what some of the girls did last week if you want to on some of the activities. If you want to join in, you can type your answers or whatever. And voilà. Alors,
petit-déj, voilà.
On va continuer un tout petit peu. We're not going to
bol.
finish this whole activity because we want to go ahead and get to
Here,
other stuff
the
tonight.
café au lait written on the side or whatever.
On a parlé,
That's
on
really
vient de
what
parler
your
de numéro
bol
4.
looks like for
Alors, pour parler de la date,
what we would call
I
a
said
bol.
before,
Here's
all you
another
have to
good
do
one.
is put le,
Mais
and
voilà.
then you're going to put the regular
But
number.
you can go ahead and use
and
bol,
then
obviously,
your
since
month.
that's what the book wants you to use.
D'accord. Le 25
But you
décembre.
two,
So again, if you're watching the video,
and anybody watching the video later,
you can pause these if you want to kind of give yourself a second to say the numbers.
Have the
and
secret.
Go review your numbers.
Information now. So anyway,
voilà.
retournons-nous à nos moutons.
Il y a un autre qui est français.
So, when you're trying to get somebody
Il y en a
back
plus
on the
qui sont
subject,
français.
let's get back to our sheep.
C'est
And
quand même
that's
pas
a really
bien
long story
d'avoir
that
qu'une
you
fête
can remind me about
française
later
sur
in
la
the semester
liste.
if you want,
They
and
should have
I'll tell
given
you.
us more stuff.
Alors, numéro
that
2,
many.
comme on dit,
Now that I think about it, there
on
aren't that
sert de la
many
soupe
holidays
dans
that
un
are only
bol ou
celebrated
bien
in
dans une
France, and we
assiette
wouldn't
à
know about. So
soupe. A lot of them are shared.
Alors,
numéro 3,
au restaurant,
le Saint-Valentin,
alors,
la serveuse doit
c'est la fête du
quoi
Saint-Valentin.
avec
Oh, on
la
n'a pas parlé
nourriture?
de la
Comment
saison.
dire?
So what
Apporter,
saison?
goûter.
C'est dans quelle saison, Noël?
Qu'est-ce que le serveur va faire avec
C'est dans
le repas?
And again, pause the video
Il va
if you
commander,
need to
il va
give yourself a
apporter,
chance to
il va
figure out
goûter.
the answers. Pour la
Il va
Saint-Valentin,
peut-être
c'est la même
goûter.
date que nous. Alors
Ça se
c'est
peut qu'il goûte aussi,
le
mais qu'est-ce qu'il fait d'habitude? apporte.
And again,
il apporte
we only need
le
a
repas
special form of the
à la
number
table.
for the first of
Il
the month.
apporte les
Every other day of the
bols, les
month, I
plats,
can just
les
use the normal
assiettes,
number.
etc.
So,
Très bien.
la Saint-Valentin,
On
c'est
vend
le
des baguettes
14
à la boulangerie, la
février, si je peux faire
la
mon accent, là.
boucherie.
Et puis, c'est dans
Où
quelle
est-ce qu'on
saison?
vend des baguettes? À la boulangerie. Très bien, Joseph. Alors,
c'est en hiver. C'est vers la fin
voilà.
de l'hiver, n'est-ce pas?
Oh, la boulangerie.
Alors, très bien.
Oh, c'est
vous pouvez quand même
nostalgique, ça
trouver cette
sent
activité
si bon.
vous-même
They
pour
smell
continuer
so
ou pour
good.
faire le
Oh my
début si
gosh,
vous n'étiez
in
pas
the
ici.
boulangerie. Oh, ok.
Voilà,
I'm okay.
on
It's
va
okay.
laisser tomber.
On met
Et
quelque chose dans le café.
on va
Qu'est-ce qu'on met dans le café?
Voilà.
Du beurre,
Très bien.
du poivre,
Alors, pour
de la
continuer un tout
crème.
petit peu, on allait
Du
faire
beurre,
le
du
écouter.
de la crème.
I really wanted to do the écouter
Qu'est-ce
because
qu'on
I
met dans le
think
café?
the more chances you guys have to listen to me,
De la
the better.
crème, très
Not
bien.
because I'm so wonderful to
On
listen
vend
to,
des gâteaux
but
à
just because it's
la
really good
boucherie,
to listen to
la
various
pâtisserie.
voices and
du poivre. Du poivre, c'est
so
pepper.
if we have time at the end,
As
what I
in the
might do
spice
is
pepper,
come back
not
to
the
this
green
activity and just do it really quick at the
green
very
pepper
end
is
after
close to
we've
that.
finished
It's
our
poivron.
numbers and everything. And you
poivre,
can use it
oui. Ça marche pas
as
dans
a
le
listening
café.
activity.
C'est un
and
peu,
actually, that would be easy to access then
c'est
because
ça
it would
que
be
les
right at the end
petits
of the video,
enfants
so you
ou
could go straight there
tout
if
le
you
monde en
wanted to.
France. This is
So,
how you
Laura,
say yucky
help me remember
in France.
that I'm going to
C'est
do this activity
yuck.
after we're all done.
C'est burk.
Alors,
Voilà.
the
Burk.
pressure.
So,
voilà,
now
on va
you guys have
continuer un
something
tout petit
else.
peu.
Ah
et
oui,
je vais
c'est
défaire
bizarre.
le
Hein.
zoom
Ouais, du poivre dans le
dans
café.
un moment là.
Ben,
Voilà.
c'est pour ça qu'on a choisi la
So
crème.
as I said,
parce que
we
nous,
are going to
on
be doing
veut de la
more with
du
the
café
video
qui
on
est bon
weeks.
quand même.
Well, you should always watch
Et
the
non
video
pas
because it's really
du
good
café qui est
listening
dégoûtant.
practice.
Voilà.
And you have
Alors
your
pour numéro 6, on vend des gâteaux à la boucherie, à la pâtisserie, à la
So be sure and
poissonnerie.
look that over, and be sure and look over the questions that they give you before you watch the video. That's going to give you a really good context.
That's the main
before you
difference
jump into
between
the video.
boucherie.
So even if you don't want to read through
pardon.
this
Boulangerie
little mini dialogue or
pâtisserie.
mini script,
Normally you
at
can
least
still
read
buy
through the
bread
questions.
at
The
a
questions are
pâtisserie.
going to give your
Normally
head
they'll still have
a
baguettes
little idea
and
about
at least
what the video is going to be about.
a fairly
And
decent selection
any
of bread items,
kind of
croissants,
fertilizing
etc.
of the ground that you can do before something like that, the better.
Whereas a boulangerie
that way you're
is
not
going to
jumping
probably
in
have
and
a
just
bigger
making your head
selection of
figure it
bread
all out cold.
items.
So give yourself
along
a
with
little bit of a
croissant
context
and
read over the
probably
questions
brioche
first before
which
if
you
we have
jump
time,
in.
I'll show you some brioche. Or you
I'm
going to
look it
keep
up if you
repeating
want
that
to.
for
Brioche
various
are
things
yummy
on the
and
quizzes and tests.
it's
and
something
stuff,
that's
if you
super
have some
traditional,
kind of
just
a
like
reading
croissant, but for
activity
some reason nobody in the
or
States
audio
don't know.
activity,
Nobody
read
in the
through
States
this
knows
stuff
what they are.
first before
Yeah,
digging in,
boulangerie
and
don't
again,
really
it
do
gives you a little bit of a
desserts.
context.
So
So
you go in
be
there
sure
for
and
all
do
your
the
bread
video.
stuff, and since they don't do
And this
cakes
time you're going to
and
have a
stuff,
few
they do
activities
things
based on
like
the
pain au
video.
chocolat.
Last week we didn't because we had
and
so
things
much
like
ground
that,
to cover.
it's mostly bread or
Dans les
bread-based
structures,
things.
n'est-ce pas?
But they will have a much bigger selection
this
normally
week
of
we will
bread.
have some activities
So
on
it's
that. So
pretty
most of the
cool,
time
all the different kinds of
will
bread that
have
they
a couple
have.
of
They don't
activities on
just
the
have
video.
baguettes. So baguette is all we
Alors,
ever
on va
hear
parler
about.
des
And
jardins
baguettes are
publics
really yummy,
français.
don't get me wrong. Pâtisserie then is going to have all of your cakes and
ça c'est très
pastries as
intéressant
well,
en fait, les
les
statistiques
éclairs,
qu'ils ont ici.
les forêts noires, tout.
C'est très important le
and
parc ou les
most likely,
les jardins publics. Il y en
kind of a
a
minimized
énormément en
selection
fait.
of
Moi je
bread
trouve qu'il y a beaucoup
items
plus
and,
qu'aux États-Unis.
des tartes.
I think there are a lot more
des tartes,
gardens
des
and parks
paniers.
in France
You guys
than
are
there
making me
here.
hungry.
Not necessarily gardens,
Okay,
but
it's
public
probably not your fault.
public
It's
parks.
really this chapter.
They just
Alors,
make a
numéro
point
7,
of having
au
them
restaurant, on commande d'abord.
kind of all over. And it's very important
Moi
to
aussi.
have ce qu'on appelle espace
C'est le
vert.
livre, c'est Brianna
They
et
like
le
to have
livre.
green space
Voilà.
in all the towns
on t'aime quand même,
and along
Brianna,
a lot of
y a
the
pas,
major
ne t'inquiète
boulevards
pas.
and things like that.
Alors,
So it is
au
really, really
restaurant,
pretty. And there are
une
a lot
entrée,
of various
un plat principal,
gardens.
une
And I
serviette.
was supposed to pull
Qu'est-ce
up
qu'on
a couple,
commande d'abord?
but I
This is
neglected
a little
to
bit
do
of a trick
so.
question if you're thinking too much in English.
Laura, I hid your dialogue box. There we go.
Qu'est-ce qu'on commande d'abord?
But I'll try to keep
d'abord
checking in
throwing
case
you
you
at
have a
all?
question.
D'abord means first of all.
So they
qu'est-ce
talk
qu'on
about the Jardin du
commande comme
Luxembourg.
première chose pour le repas?
So you can look these up obviously
now,
too.
according to
The
a
Jardin du
selon,
Luxembourg.
at least that's usually the most common way
My
to say it.
first few times in
Selon.
France, my first time in France,
Une
we
entrée,
studied in
voilà, une
Paris for a
entrée,
month
très bien,
before we
Brianna.
went on to where we were
Une
going to live.
serviette,
And it
you
was
wouldn't
in
have to
September,
ask
so
for.
we always
That's going to
did
be
our
at the
homework
table.
here
But yes, you will need one, n'est-ce
around
pas?
the lac.
Et
Around
puis, assuming you
boat
already
pond
have your serviette
in the
at the
Jardin du
table, you're going to
Luxembourg.
ask for
And they really
l'entrée.
do
Vous
come
allez
and
commander
play with
l'entrée.
sailboats in the
Voilà. Et
boat
puis,
pond.
le
It's
plat
really pretty
principal.
cool.
Et
Alors,
puis,
il y
numéro
en a
8,
un autre
on
qu'ils
vend
ont
du
mentionné,
jambon
c'est les Tuileries.
ou à la charcuterie, à
Last
la
time I was in
crèmerie, à la
France,
pâtisserie.
this was my favorite garden because I lived
Où
close
est-ce
to
qu'on
it,
vend du
les
jambon?
Tuileries. There's a
Faut qu'on
big
dise
area that's green and you can walk through and you can just sit and
du
park,
jambon.
sit on benches and stuff. The same thing in the
Qu'est-ce que c'est que le
Luxembourg. They have
jambon,
that as
vous
well in the
rappelez?
Luxembourg. And then there also is
Du
an
jambon.
area where you can sit around
À la
the
charcuterie, à la crèmerie,
around the
très bien,
reflecting
Joseph,
pool
à
or
la,
the lac.
à la charcuterie.
And
Alors, charcuterie
it's
is
just
at
really
once
nice
the
and
store
peaceful.
where you buy
And they have
those kinds of
these
things,
metal
and
chairs
it's
that you
actually the name
may have
that
seen or you
call
may not have
those
seen,
kinds
and
of
some
things.
of
So
them
if you
are
were,
angled so that they kind of
buying
recline.
stuff for a picnic or something,
And
you might say,
that is
oh, you know,
super
I'm going to
nice
bring
to sit
la
in one of those
charcuterie,
reclining
meaning
chairs
I'm going to bring
and read a book
things
or
that a
do your
charcuterie
homework or whatever
often is
in
translated
France.
as kind of a
Now, a
deli.
couple of
It's
gardens
really
that I'm
not
familiar with, I wanted to
very
show
close
you
to a
too.
deli. They do some things like that. You can order lunch sandwiches, and they sometimes have ready-to-go little
or some
square, little
pictures.
ready-to-go pizzas and stuff like that. And they'll usually have some salad
I have
items
some pictures,
too.
but
So in that respect, it's kind of
I'm
like
a little
deli,
bit between computers
but,
right now, so I can't get to my
it's not
photos
like
as easily as usual.
going in and getting a sub
If somebody
or
will
something
remind
at
me,
a
I'll
deli
try to
like
pull
we
up
could
some of
here.
those photos so you can see a picture of this
And
park.
they will
It's a really
have
pretty little
normally
park,
ham, pork,
and it has a little brook
all
that goes
kinds of
through the
things like
park.
that, sausages,
And we used to go
of
study
course,
here when I was in
and anything that we think of as like
when I
cold
studied in
cuts,
Tours,
things like that.
which is where we went after Paris. So I've
charcuterie.
studied in Tours
That's
several
the
times.
best.
I lived in Tours
That's one of the
several
best
times.
meals you can have. Is just go to a
So that's a nice
charcuterie
little
and just
park.
grab a
Et
few,
puis,
you know, 100 grams of like
this
a whole
is
bunch of
probably
different
not
kinds
as
of things and
interesting
take it to a
as I
park.
want it to be.
So c'est super super bon. Voilà. Alors, ce qu'on va faire aussi,
Voilà.
normalement on va
L'autre
faire un truc à
parc
l'oral.
dont j'allais vous parler,
I do like you guys to
c'est ce parc,
hear
this is
me
the
doing
Musée de
some
Beaux-Arts
audio
in
for
Tours. It's a
audio
small
comprehension.
museum. It's big for Tours,
Normally, just
but,
because it's really good for you to hear as many different voices as
and Tours
possible
is this
speaking
town
French.
in the Loire Valley.
What I'm going to do, since we're running a little bit short on time,
but in particular,
is
they have
I'm
this
going
ginormous
to, at the very end,
cedar tree that was a gift
come back
to
and do this activity
Napoleon from Lebanon, which is
360
really cool. So it's a really, really old tree.
And that will actually
I wish
be
there were
easy
some
too. If you
close-ups
want to
because they
access it
actually
later, you
have,
can just go
oh,
straight
there's
to the
some.
end of the video and
They
you
have
can
these
access it and keep replaying it as many times as
beams
you want.
holding its
So
branches
we'll come
up
back
because it's
and
so
do that.
old.
And
The branches are
those of you
so
who are
heavy
listening to
that
the
they would break off if they
or
let them
watching the
go.
video,
So
you guys can replay it as well.
there's
as many
also
times as you want. So,
an elephant.
voilà.
At this
Ce que
park,
j'allais mentionner ensuite,
it's a very random thing. Basically, Barnum and Bailey came to Tours, and this elephant Fritz went crazy and started storming the streets. And unfortunately, they had
as I said, we're going to start looking at the video.
euthanize him.
That is, you've already been looking at the video.
So,
theoretically,
for whatever reason,
those
they
of you who are
stuffed
new
him
to the
and
book,
put him in the garden
you might need to go back
the
and
Musée
just
de
play
Beaux-Arts.
some
And
of the
so
earlier
the cathedral
parts of
is
the
right
video
next to that garden.
to get an
I'm
idea
going
what's
back to the
happened
textbook
already.
now.
Every
The
time
cathedral
you
is
go
right
watch
next to
the
that
video,
garden,
especially if
and
you have too
little
much trouble
French kids
understanding
love to go
go
say
to
hi to
this
Fritz
spread.
after
They
Mass
have it every
on
lesson.
Sundays.
And
Those who
you don't
go to
have to
Mass.
read the little
So that's a kind of a
abridged
different
script that they
garden
have here. You can if you want.
that we might not have over here.
But even the pictures give you a really good idea about what the context
when you
is
have a
about.
minute, you should look over this stuff
And
about
if you'll read through the
cyclisme,
questions
too.
before
Obviously,
watching the
cycling
video,
is incredibly
that
important
will
in France. It's got
help
a
your
huge
head
place
have
in the
an
culture.
even better context before jumping in on the video.
And
so it'll give you
I did several
a little bit of a
several,
preview and
bike tours
even
in
if you
France.
don't consciously know
when you're on a
what's gonna
bike,
happen,
people come and talk to you
your
all the
brain
time.
will be
It's
more
kind of like
ready
going to the
for
park with a
watching the
dog
video
here in the
than
States,
if you
where
just
people
go in cold. So
who wouldn't normally
always
come
read
right
over
up to you and
that
start
stuff before
talking
you
to
watch
you
it, and that'll
would
give you
come
a
up
little
and
bit
just
of a
start
warm-up.
conversing with you because
And
they'd
that's
see
something
your
I'll
bike,
probably
and
keep saying
they
all
thought that was the
semester because you
coolest
need to
thing
do that on
ever.
quizzes and tests
That
too. If there's a little audio
an
section
American
or
would be
if there's a
riding through
reading
France.
section.
So
If you'll read the questions first,
pretty cool.
that gives you a leg up before you jump in on the activity.
On va parler des nombres. On allait parler des repas.
De 101.
We are running, as I said, short on time, but I did
want
to.
The cool thing about these
statistics
numbers
were incredibly interesting, and
if you go back and review 0 to 99,
which I used to have that page written
usually
down.
the 400% is really
but it's
horrendous.
obviously earlier
But
in
in
the
this
book,
case,
and
I think
pretty
it'll
easy
help
for you
us.
to find in the index or
les Français et les
table of
repas.
contents.
Alors,
But if you go back and review those,
the thing that I think is so interesting
about
about this
stuff
is that I
already
think
done.
a lot of these numbers are
Because
very
everything we're
different
going to do
than
from
they
here
would
on
be
out,
here.
except for a couple of vocab words,
Maybe you agree, maybe you
is
don't.
based on
Regardez le
those
premier.
numbers that you already learned how to
des
do.
Français ne prennent
So
pas de petit déjeuner.
you may remember that when
So 10% of French people
we got to
ne
it
prend
made it
pas
small
de
again.
petit déjeuner.
That when you got to numbers
Don't
like
have
70, you had to do something
they
wacky,
not
right?
eat?
You had to say 70.
10% of French people.
10.
Do you remember what
N'est-ce
petit
pas?
déjeuner is?
And when you got to a
Très
number
bien,
like
très bien.
80, you
Très
basically
bien
had to say
aussi, je sais.
80,
Alors,
n'est-ce pas?
10% of French people.
And
I
when you get
think
to 90,
in the
things were
States
even
there
weirder,
are probably
right?
way more people that skip
So,
breakfast. That's just my own opinion. I have no idea.
So
You guys can look up the statistics and inform the whole class if you want to. But
so 420
I just
plus
feel
10.
like that number would be
all
a lot
of that is
bigger
still going to
over
happen.
here.
So whenever you have anything in the tens spot, you're still
Alors,
going to have to do those.
Pour le
So
deuxième,
you definitely should bone up on those.
60% boivent du café
But everything
matin,
else is going to be
20% du thé, 15%
like
du
you've
chocolat.
already practiced, and it's going to be pretty easy.
Breakfasts are changing a
So,
lot.
as
in
I said, there's
France,
just
but
a
I
couple
still
of
think
new
this is
vocab
true.
words. One of them is
you
sans,
see a lot
which
more
you should
people
have already
now.
known, but
there are
for
people
100,
who,
it's
at least part of the time,
if I only
still
have
will
100, I don't have to say
baguettes
anything. I can just say
with
sans.
butter and jam.
If I have more than 100, I need to say a number.
Hot
So
chocolate
200,
or café au lait or something
400,
for breakfast.
Je vais zoomer un peu plus.
But a lot of people
Maybe I should
will
zoom
eat
again.
fruit or yogurt or
The 400 is awful.
granola and things like
Okay.
that in the morning.
Well, let me know if that
Which
just drives you
sticks to
absolutely
your bones
crazy
a
when you're
lot
watching
better
the
than
video, and we'll try to figure
baguette,
something
even
out.
though baguette
But,
is incredibly yummy.
The Zoom is really stupid
So,
on VText.
whatever.
I'm just gonna say it.
We can
It's
go
stupid.
ahead and eat our baguette, but we
Alors,
need to eat something more
comme j'ai dit,
hearty
vous allez
along
mettre
with
juste
it.
le numéro 200, 300, 400.
I don't know how these numbers would compare in the States,
When you
but
get to 1000, the same
in
thing
France,
happens.
this seems
1000
just
means
about
1,000.
accurate. But
It's a little misleading.
Even the
right?
people who are eating more healthy
But
things are
just
probably
remember,
still grabbing
it's 1,000. When you
coffee.
get to million, that's the
alors,
same
celui-là,
number, same word
ça
as we
c'est
use, so that kind of
super,
is easy on
super,
you.
super, je trouve.
For 1000, the same thing. When you just have 1,000, you
99%
don't have to say
dînent
anything. So
chez
1000,
eux en semaine.
1100, etc. If
Alors,
I want to say more than
99%
1,000,
of French
so
people
2,000, etc.,
eat
then I need the number. So 2000, 5000, 100,000, etc.
chez eux.
And the same
Vous rappelez ce que
structures
ça veut dire,
that work
chez?
in English work in French. That
Chez
is,
is
I don't
at
know if you've
someone's
ever
house.
noticed,
Voilà,
but when
at
we
their
get to
house.
big numbers,
During the week. D'accord?
there is one
So
difference. We're using
they're
a decimal instead of
very
comma.
likely going to go out
So if you saw
to
a
have a dinner
price
somewhere
in
on the
France, you
but
might see
they're going to have dinner at home throughout the week. D'accord?
4,000.
I think that number would be a
euro,
lot lower
50
here.
cents. D'accord?
Depending
So
on
that
the,
part's going to be switched.
you
But
know, the area
once you
and
get
demographics and everything,
past
of
that
course,
little weirdness,
but, I just feel like it would
if
be
you've
lower
noticed, when we
35%
count in
dînent
English,
en
we
famille,
always go by
30%
those
en
threes.
couple.
So if I have
So
32,987,
this has gone down a lot.
I'm gonna
And
pause
I
in
don't know, here in
between
the
each
States,
set.
maybe it wouldn't be too much lower.
32,987. If I add some more on here, I'm going to say 32 million.
French families, to me, it feels like there's still just a little more glue there.
So I'm always going in those groups. If I have another number at the front,
the kids don't have
same thing.
quite as much stuff to do outside the household in the afternoons and evenings.
Same thing is gonna, I mean million, but
sorry,
that's
I
changing
can count.
too. So
32
million.
des dîners
Et en français, we're going to do the same thing. We're not going to jump right up there and do that huge number when we've just started. But just to give you an example, the same thing would happen. 532
at least
millions 987 110.
successifs.
D'accord? So you kind of have a little breathing space in between each set. So let those decimals, which again are the same as our commas, guide you. D'accord? Now there are some rules about when to use
dishes is
S's
pretty close. 3
or
courses.
not on the ends of these numbers.
So
basically,
meal
is translated as dish, but it means a dish like
if cent or million,
she made a Mexican dish. It was called enchiladas, or
or des milliards.
It's not the actual dish, but the stuff that's in it. So
if cent or million,
whatever the item is that you made, right,
gets to be
so,
more than one.
This is crazy.
You're going to add an S.
I mean, I think it's totally
now, this
true.
will be
when was the last time
something
you
that will probably lose you a couple tenths of a point here and there on the VTech
where you had
in WebSam.
Even 2 courses.
I'm going to try not to have.
I guess there's still a lot of people that eat salad
quiz,
regularly, so that's
might
good.
just not let me.
But
offer you 2 different forms.
I just think that's
if
crazy.
you think about it,
but this is a really good
representation
of how
not very often,
important
mostly just on checks,
meals
which
are for
you guys
French
pretty
people.
much don't even touch
it's
anymore,
so
right?
different being at a meal with a bunch of French people.
So
the average French person actually doesn't know this rule. To share ideas and spend time together. And
you're very likely, if you talk to 2 or 3 people on the street
and
in Paris,
it's yummy and all that stuff,
I guarantee you.
But it's more like
in those 2 or 3 people
that didn't know the fringe benefit
kind
of being together.
So just like in English, we have lots of things that
get together to
we
eat,
don't use on a regular basis, and we might forget how to do it
table,
because we never write numbers out, or we never say it that way,
kind
or
of
like that.
Kind of a fine ballet.
This isn't
super
all
key
people,
for
it's not key at all.
And the conversation,
but just be aware of it.
They really like to
if you have to
see
write
what
out
everybody's
any numbers
thinking
in WebSam or on the quizzes.
They like to get into friendly arguments and stuff like that, and that will happen very often at dinner. And even in the family.
So if I take a bunch of these,
there will be a lot of conversation and everybody checking on.
As soon as I have my hundreds,
I know we do that in families
more than
now.
100, right?
Families here
I'm just going to use the number like I normally would.
Yeah,
500, and then I'm going to go on with my number
together,
just like I would in
just
English.
a whole culture unto itself.
En fait, quand on
France,
dit
and probably
on va
lots
dire
of other
500
countries,
francs,
and probably there are people in the States
you're
who
not
still
generally going to hear this
have family dinners and stuff and still consider them
when you first learned your
important,
numbers, hopefully somebody told you not to pronounce
Le pain est présent
the
dans plus de
Q
60% des déjeuners et des dîners.
That has a consonant.
That's not surprising.
The same thing's going to happen here.
I would think
So
it was higher, except there are people who are eating less bread in France, just like here.
Voilà. Those are the essentials, really. It's actually pretty
not
basic.
because of gluten.
So what we're going to do...
because they're just trying to
Je vais
regarder la
ça.
ligne, n'est-ce pas?
Voilà.
Le pain est présent dans plus de 60% des
Oh là là, il ne veut pas bouger là.
An interesting thing is, if you have anybody in your family or if you have any friends who are
Très bien.
gluten,
You do have
trouble
a
with
little bit of
gluten.
vocab up here because they're going to have
when they go to
doing
France,
a little bit of math.
they probably will
with your
not have
numbers.
any
D'accord?
trouble at all.
So these are pretty
the
straightforward.
flour is processed
And,
completely differently.
Honestly,
and
they do
I
say
used to
formal
take
and
groups of
informal
students
here.
to Paris every summer.
Most people
and
just stick with these.
2
when
out of
they're
the
talking.
2 different years.
Maybe you would hear your
I had
professor,
girls
your
who were
math professor
very
use this rather
intolerant
than
of
this,
gluten.
but
It sounds funny. And
they use them interchangeably
they
enough
ate
that I
baguettes
wasn't
and
aware that
croissant
they were
and
considered
stuff
informal and
like
formal.
crazy
I thought
all
they were
summer
interchangeable.
long, and they were
It made sense
absolutely
once I
fine.
noticed this.
So it's not
a few years ago.
It is the gluten in the States, but it's really how it's processed.
It's not super
it's
crucial.
not really.
So don't worry
gluten
too much
itself
about the
that's
informal
causing
versus
trouble.
the formal.
I wanted
Just
to
know
point
what
out
they mean
couscous. If you've
and
never
be
had
able to use them
couscous,
as you're
you
doing
need to
some
have
math
some.
in
And
French.
if you do any cooking
nous,
whatsoever, I have a
on va
pretty simple
regarder
recipe for couscous
les
that's
nombres
just
ici.
incredibly
Alors,
yummy.
10 000. On va le faire sur
Couscous
le
uses the little
website, n'est-ce
semoule,
pas?
is what we call this pasta. That's the little tiny.
Avec
Ouais, avec les croissants, n'est-ce pas?
Voilà.
Has these little grains of
Voilà.
pasta,
Très bien.
basically, and then
Alors,
normally it's kind
10
of
000,
it could
and
be
as
a
I
fish
said,
couscous.
you're going to get used to this
More often
decimal
it's got
treatment
beef or
eventually.
pork or chicken, and then lots of
Your
vegetables.
eye will just
and
go ahead and morph it
it's
the way it needs to morph
it's
it.
a little bit spicy,
So,
and then there's a little sauce that they
620.
serve
Now
with
remember,
it
we're
that's
going to
crazy
go one at a
spicy that
time.
you might put on it as
So,
well.
Qu'est-ce que vous allez dire? And again,
So
if you need
it's
to pause the video
it's so
before
yummy.
you do these,
So,
then do that.
Voilà. The best couscous I ever had was one of the hotels I worked in.
This
I'm gonna find our
is
other
funny.
page while I talk.
See,
I promise.
okay. How long have I been doing French?
One of the hotels that I worked in.
I'm not gonna do the math, but I've been
one
doing
of our
French
workers was
since
from Algeria. His name was
1978.
Ahmed.
Whoa,
and
that's a long time.
he was leaving to go to another job, and
And
when
I'm just
we did a big party for him as a going away party.
If you're coming up with something else after those, then you drop the S.
I don't know was Algerian but lived in France.
So you're going to have the S on the plural.
She made homemade Algerian couscous,
but not
for us
on the plural
millions. It was glorious.
But
so
if you have something coming afterwards, then you're supposed to drop the S again.
Any couscous
that's the part
is good.
That's going to be hard. If you have a chance to
just like couscous,
right then when I had to go check
Alors,
it. So,
so I'm not going to be able to see you for a couple minutes. We're going to talk about, oh, there was actually something I wanted to talk about real quick first.
I've been doing French for all that time, and I still have to check things once in a while. But that's a good example of something that really isn't needed for communication. And
we're going to be digging into comparative and superlative.
Comparative and superlative work very much
that's my
like they do in
defense,
English.
is that the average French
so
person
comparative and superlative is anytime you're comparing a couple things. You say,
620.
I don't know.
600.
Bill is taller than John.
Without an S or with an S?
Barb speaks French better than Mary, or whatever.
620. C'est tout.
And then superlative is if I say
365. Same, même principe, n'est-ce pas? Same idea.
Is if I say, oh, you know, Barb speaks French better than anybody. She speaks French the best. Or Bill is the tallest, or whatever. So, one thing that everybody probably needs to do is just go back and look at adjectives and adverbs. We don't really need to do that. That's going to take a little longer. So I'm going to actually use my little impromptu board.
1,392,000.
What I wanted to underline
I do have to use the number.
The couple of main things that you need to remind yourselves about adverbs and adjectives. So if you remember, hopefully, adjectives describe things or people or places. And adverbs describe
these hyphens
actions,
or something too that
describe verbs.
Once in a while I have to go check them. But again,
just hardly ever write numbers out, whatever.
So I'm not
runs quickly
super
or
worried
slowly or weirdly
what you guys
or
goes. It's not
or whatever.
So
but you should be aware. It's the difference between describing the thing or the person,
later, especially
versus
those of you who are
describing
majoring or
how they
minoring,
do something.
You will need to know that.
So the reason I'm underlining this is because you need to remember that stuff in order to do what we're doing today.
So 171.
And one of the biggest things you need to remember about it is that on adjectives, I'm sure you remember, you have to do agreement.
I'm going to say 60.
Right? So if I'm going to say, Liana est intelligent.
Yes. Oh, 60.
Liana is female. What do I need
for
agreement?
I thought it was 170 for a second. Et puis, 200 million.
Intelligent.
Il n'y a rien de plus facile.
Voilà. Intelligente.
J'arrive pas à taper, c'est tout.
Tandis que si c'était pour Joseph, bien sûr,
that gives you an idea.
Intelligent.
Oh, we're okay.
Masculin,
I was thinking we were running late, so we can go ahead and finish
tous les
this one.
deux. Alors, B
480
sont intelligents.
So again,
what do I
pause
need
this
this
video
time?
if you want to give yourself a chance.
Yes. Voilà. D'accord? And then, of course, we have feminine plural as well that I'm sure you remember. And you have a lot of adjectives that have wacky endings, so go back and review those as well. That's going to be a theme all semester. Pretty much everything we do is based on stuff that you've done before. And again, that's just the nature of having a cumulative knowledge subject that we deal with.
So we're going to put parentheses around the S.
Any time that you can go back and refresh your memory, it's a really good thing to do. So if you need to, go back and look at adjectives. There's 2 or 3 sections. If you guys need to, I can pull up the page numbers and put them on.
I keep starting to say them in French, and
they should be relatively easy to find in the table of contents. I used to have all those pages memorized, believe it or not, but I don't remember what pages the adjectives were on anymore. That's kind of weirdly maniacal. But anyway, now by contrast, what do we need to do with adverbs? If I want to say Liana,
I don't need a hyphen here.
I know that for sure.
Par exemple, je sais pas, lentement. 80.
D'accord. Do I need anything on here?
Voilà. Très bien. Alors, le
400 real quick too.
C'est super facile, n'est-ce pas? 400. And what do I need?
One of my cats was on my book.
Yes. So let me look for it real quick.
I started to say it. 8 million.
I should start a new list. Usually I put a list in the front of the book so that I can grab all of those.
Mille is the one that never takes an S.
Page numbers for you guys really quickly.
5053
if I need it. You've got a lot of adjective stuff, descriptive adjectives in 3A.
And I'm just going to skip over it like I wrote in
And you've
English,
got
right?
adjectives
I don't need to say anything
in
for the hundreds.
1B.
So 500.
Well, I'm going to jot that down so that I can remind everybody at some point.
Again,
adjectives.
usually when we jump in on these, the people who have the biggest trouble are the people who need to go back and review their numbers earlier.
2.
So take a few minutes to go back and review those, do a couple of the activities in the v-text or something,
I know
kind
the
of
ones with
refresh your
wacky
memory.
endings.
Because those, again, that's the hardest stuff.
As well.
89
in the
or
descriptives.
71, those are the parts that are the hardest about this.
So there you go.
The stuff that we're doing today is actually way easier than that stuff was. So be sure
if I've
got an
adverb
to go look
what
at
do
that
I need
and
to do?
refresh your memory before you jump in on
do I
the
need to do
activities.
anything?
Oui, on va quitter. Parle lentement. Voilà. Alors, on allait faire
remember what I said about adverbs. We're talking about adjectives. We're describing a person or a thing. So they're agreeing with that person or that thing, right? An adverb is describing an action. Voilà.
Oh, there was one other thing I was going to mention.
Actually, we'll get my little parce que c'est l'action et l'action n'a pas de genre.
Alors,
I don't have genders for actions.
The other thing I was going to mention was,
so there's no way to make a group. It's not going to make any difference if I say Rihanna parle lentement.
Yes, if anybody was wondering whether you can say numbers the way we do sometimes, 1989.
Biggest reason I'm underlining all this stuff, aside from
you can certainly do that, and they do tend to do that just about as much as we do.
Get your head around them again.
Generally, only on years.
Is that
so? If I was telling a price. So it was the year 1989. I'm going to break it into two.
Facts these rules go by the wayside.
So I do still have to say my
going to act exactly the same that they've always acted when you're doing the superlatives and comparatives. That is, if you're dealing with an adjective, you've got to be sure to make agreement. If you're dealing with an
still need
adverb,
to say
you're not going to. Okay. So
now, if this were a
just
price,
keep thinking that, and there will be a couple of different pieces of the superlatives in particular that when you're using an adjective, you need to make agreement
I used to remember
in
where
a couple
my
of extra places.
I don't remember today.
Because of it being an adjective.
On va faire on va mettre le dollar alors.
Alors,
si
voilà.
C'était, if it were
maintenant, on va regarder le PowerPoint.
They're going to tend
I like how they've set this up.
Say it
if you can set these
the
up
way we were saying
and
those
have
other
them look
numbers,
kind of like
rather than
formulas
breaking it here
in your notes.
You will hear that once in a
just
while, but
use the
normally
PowerPoint to study
it's
off of, or the
pretty
book.
much only with years.
D'accord? That's going
now,
to
when
be
they
the
get to the
best way,
2000s,
because
they do like
you
we
want to
do,
try to
and they
keep
say
these elements
par exemple,
separate from each other, and you want to.
You're not going to hear anybody say 20
look at each different kind with the same format, so that your head
maybe
can kind
when
of
we're in the
compare,
22nd century,
and
we'll hear people
it knows
saying,
what to plug in where.
2100.
So, to compare people, things, actions, you're going to use these expressions with both adjectives and adverbs.
Chiefly for the years, not so much
and the only
when you see
difference
the number
is
used differently.
what comes before,
or if I were counting people, and I said
so on our little
1,989 people.
on our little blackboard,
ça aussi,
go away. I have être here, and I have agreement.
Voilà.
Probably,
so that's just an
if I have
aside,
an adjective here,
that I had
I'm going to have
made a note a few years ago. Because usually
9.3% of the time, I don't know.
If you were curious about that,
we use être with
on va regarder
adjective.
so
activité 1. Être is going to be your big clue that you're talking about.
So these
an
are a
adjective.
little easier. They're writing it out for you.
You should recognize the adjective
you just
as well.
Have to,
and I'm going to make agreement on the adjective. I'm going to use one of these to make the comparison.
Aussi. So
and then
now,
I'm going to have my adjective right away.
These aren't as tricky when they're written now.
Go ahead and make agreement
hear somebody.
And then
if we were
is
in a live
setting
class, that's
this
what
person
I would do
over
is
here,
have
this
a
imaginary
dictate
person,
at this point where you guys
apart from somebody
try
else.
To write out the numbers.
Okay, this is unfortunate that they stuck this right there, because that's just your translation.
If you want to.
Normally you would have another person or another thing over here. Okay.
Alors,
so
here,
on va regarder un exemple.
Read it out to yourself if you need to. Use your v-text to compare.
And what do I end up with? 252.
Voilà.
Je sais pas.
Et
plus 400 avenue Malbon. Ce sont tous des adresses, n'est-ce pas? These are all addresses.
D'accord? It's
So,
agreeing with the first person mentioned,
rien de plus facile.
just
400
like it
avenue Malbon.
did when
177 ans.
simple sentences, right?
Alors, 100.
So don't worry about whoever the other
again,
person is. You're making
stuff
agreement
that's
with
the most
first person, just like you always
stuff
have.
that you already
So
had,
nothing
right?
is changed,
77.
except that I'm putting
So
some
10,
extra
that
elements
is
in here.
60, 10,
Alors, si
7.
je changeais ça, je sais pas quoi.
Alors, 177. Ouais.
Anne-Marie.
156 ans.
Et plus
Avenue des
intelligent.
Gaulois. Oh, pardon, j'ai sauté. 156 boulevard Saint-Marc.
Pierre.
Alors, 100.
N'est-ce pas? Because again, I'm agreeing with this first person. So if I have a plural here, I'm going to go accordingly.
Go away. Qu'est-ce que vous dites?
If I have
600,
feminine plural, masculine plural, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm going to agree with the first batch of people or things or the first person or
So
thing.
again, pause these if you need to give yourself a chance to guess.
Alors, on va
392.
So here you have a whole bunch of examples. Simone est plus âgée que son mari, moins sportif, aussi indépendante. And again, if any of these adjectives or adverbs are throwing you need to go back and review those.
80.
And notice what's happening.
If you're tempted to put an 8
it doesn't matter about this person. It matters about this person, right? And you have être here, as I said, that's your big clue. Now, if I don't have être, if I have an action verb, or really almost any verb except être, I'm probably going to be needing an adverb here. What's happening with the adverbs, that is, what's happening with the adjectives that isn't happening with the adverbs?
Celui-là avec les maths.
Right?
You can do the math
never
one
had to
yourself.
make agreement
I think
on adverbs. I'm not
some
going to
of the
start
ones
now.
that I'm going to be
always
assigning on the
made it
website.
on adjectives, and I'm going to continue to do so.
You have to do some math. So you'll need to write out those commands, right?
So those were all
155,
those were all comparatives.
font
Two people. And you can think of comparative as kind of like a scale. You have one person on either side. When I move on to superlatives, now I'm bringing one person or thing out of the group and I'm saying huge numbers. It's the
not
most.
anymore
It's
since
the
people don't write checks.
ugliest, it's the smallest, it's the yuckiest, it's the
I wouldn't be surprised if
most
none
beautiful,
of you had ever
whatever.
written a check.
D'accord?
You
And
probably
now I'm
have
just
once
adding one more
in
thing.
a great while, but
When I
wouldn't
have
be
the
surprised if you
adjective version,
Alors,
I don't need OC.
ce sont les habitants. D'accord? So
OC
how many
means just
people
as,
live in
right?
each of
So
these
there's no way
cities?
for me to use that with a superlative.
Alors Toulouse.
I'm only going to have plus ou moins, because things can only be
so think
less
to yourself
or
and remember
the
what I said
most
about
or
going
the
by
least,
threes.
right?
So give yourself a little
And
space between
since
each
I've got
trio.
an adjective
Alors
and I make
300.
agreement with adjectives, I'm going to use le, la, les,
300.
and I'm going to make them agree to.
Very similar to the one we just did.
Okay.
Oh là là,
This is just like in English. It's the same
là.
setup as when I say Pierre is the tallest person in the class, right? And I have an article.
And then what?
So really the setup is just like we do.
Quatre.
Only difference, I'm going to make agreements. But if you just remember your adjective rules,
easy peasy.
you've always made agreement with adjectives. You're going to keep making agreement with adjectives. You just now have one more element to work in there.
D'accord?
So, le TGV est le train le
à
plus
Abidjan, il y
rapide
a
du monde.
2 millions.
Oh, pardon.
Oh, pardon.
N'est-ce pas? Alors, le plus
Millions.
rapide, parce que c'est masculin singulier.
Oui.
Eva et Martine sont les filles les moins réservées de la classe. And you don't have to say
Oh, pardon. 60.
D'accord? It might be understood by context. So, I could just as
877.
easily say Eva et Martine
Je peux compter,
sont les moins réservées de la
77.
classe. I don't know why that keeps doing that. Okay. Alors,
we need now?
voilà. But look again.
1000.
I'm making agreement with
Et
both
puis,
my
the
adjective
last trio.
and my
900.
article. D'accord?
40. Oh, j'arrive pas à taper.
Alors, superlative construction.
Voilà.
You can put things
D'accord.
before
Millions.
or after.
Qu'est-ce que vous me donnez?
Most of the time,
So break it
you
into
put
trios
adjectives
again. This one's
before
easier.
if they usually go before.
So, 400.
D'accord? You can have some that go back and
50.
forth. I know they are presenting it as if it's interchangeable, and that's totally fine. But I would say that most of the time we opt for where the adjective goes. but it's okay. You want to make it interchangeable with these. D'accord? They can. It's totally correct to put them after.
Voilà.
Alors, now we're switching to adverbs with superlative, right?
I have to look at the number.
Again. Remember, I have le, la, les.
When I read it to you afterwards, I can't look at this part. It freaks me out. I just look at the number. It's easier.
Of adjectives.
That's really weird.
Now I'm going to use just le.
À Québec. Combien d'habitants y a à Québec?
In superlative.
So again, do it in trios.
Because just like way back when, here's my little example.
Alors 510 000. Ouais.
Voilà. Just like with parler lentement, je parle lentement, tu parles lentement. I said there's no gender for an action, so there's no way to make agreement.
No.
The same thing is true now.
Voilà.
There's no way to make agreement.
510 000,
so the way that I'm just making a neutral article is just use le. So you're going to default to le, and you're not making agreement, but otherwise it's the same exact instruction.
But I found it. Yay! Or not my passport, my youth hostel card. Yeah, I would have been really freaked out if I lost my passport.
Now, there's one more difference.
807,071.
This is deceptively easy. It really is. Don't let it throw you. Basically,
just like in English, I can't say, science is gooder than math. 26,181.
Right? Little kids actually go through a period where they try to just assimilate all of their adjectives, and they'll say gooder or badder, right? But we know that those words don't exist when you're speaking correctly. We say better or whatever. D'accord? Better or worse or whatever. The same kind of thing happens in French. Basically, I cannot say
Dakar. Où est Dakar? Où se trouve Dakar?
Plus bon.
Au Sénégal,
n'est-ce pas? Plus bien.
There's a wacky
they just don't exist.
Race
just like badder and gooder and
Paris
weller
Dakar.
Don't exist in English.
Actually, I haven't heard much about it.
So
lately,
honestly,
we don't hear about it
all you
here.
have to do is look at your formula,
and it's kind of one of those things where
and
you
if
just
you
get
see
there
that your formula
however you
is
possibly
using
can, and people have died on it
bon,
and stuff because you basically drive these
mauvais,
jeeps and stuff through the desert.
You have to stop and use a different word.
Take a ferry
and that
across
word's
from,
going to take the place of this whole
Grenada
thing.
or something.
Now, what they're telling you is that you have to use
continuer là. So it's pretty long.
They did tell you that it's optional.
It's pretty interesting.
So good.
So some
because
of you,
it used to be not
sports,
optional. You used to have to go to P. So I
century
probably
runs
use
and stuff
P
like that, or
way
watching
more
that
than
stuff
you're going
on
to. Just because I learned that
reality
it was only
TV,
proper to do
you
that.
might enjoy
But in the last
looking
20
at
years or so, people have started saying plus mauvais, and now it's completely acceptable. So when you're talking about mauvais, you can do either. D'accord?
That's called.
When you're talking about bon, you have to switch it to meilleur.
And I bet all you have to do
so another
is
way of looking at this is that,
and you'll find it. So à Dakar, il y a 2,476,400.
Plus bon doesn't exist.
D'accord.
Million.
Oh, pardon.
And I can't remember how to copy my formatting really fast. So instead, I'm just going to do this. And I'm going to opt for meilleur instead of that whole word. Meilleur is an adjective. It's based on bon, and bon is an adjective. So I'm probably
what do I need on
agreement, right? So
because nothing else is coming.
It takes the same agreement
that
you use and
Nice, c'est super beau, hein?
It takes the same agreement that you had on
Il y
your
a
most
beaucoup de
basic
touristes,
adjectives
par contre.
way
Mais
back
c'est
when.
super beau.
That,
Et la plage, il y a beaucoup de petits musées. Il y a un musée sur, il y a un musée pour les œuvres
and
de
that's
Matisse.
all you have to worry about. So if I want to say,
super,
je sais pas,
super bien
ce
habillé,
bispo,
etc. C'est très très beau.
Et meilleur.
Et il y en a d'autres.
Alors, 300, n'est-ce pas? Alors si je change ça,
do I need Ness or not?
Je sais pas quoi.
Why not?
Because I've got something else coming later.
300.
Oh là là. Je sais pas, cette église.
4.
N'est-ce pas? Et meilleur.
What's next?
And now I'm going to add E because église is feminine.
And then my last trio. So just think of meilleur as an adjective. It is an adjective for all intents and purposes. The same thing comes true. The same principle comes in.
Voilà.
I'm not going to do that. We're going to go here. Alors, as I said, the hardest thing about this is the stuff you've already done. Bien. So you got to go back probably and review how your 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s work. Mieux. Because that's still the hardest thing. And then I remember this thing about when to use an S and when not to use an S. Mieux is never going to take agreement. If you're majoring or minoring. So just like I would use bien, may or may not need to know that at some point. If you just want French, there's no way to make agreement for your requirements or to go and communicate with somebody in France, you don't need to worry about those S's. D'accord? Except for whatever web sound might make you do. Because it's an adverb. And I will try to remember to be this will all be on the recording, less picky about obviously, and you can take them because as you can see, or those of you who are watching the recording, a gazillion years of French behind me use those as well. Now, I have to stop and think about when I need S and when I don't, because we just never write numbers out. For mal, c'est assez bizarre. D'écrire les choses, the adverb one. Alors oui, on va you can actually say pire instead of plus mal too. Or you can say plus mal to remind me what it's totally acceptable, just like plus mauvais is acceptable. Or you can say pire don't for it listen also. To this. So pire does double duty. Activity. Pire can be an adjective totally fine. I will not. If you're using it as an adjective, be sure and make agreement. Offended or anything. Voilà. But I'm gonna read. Actually. Alors. There, they're showing you some of the agreements on meilleur et pire, n'est-ce pas? And notice our article is not changing for the adverb, but it is changing for the adjective, right? If you guys want to, you can access this part of the video pretty easily by just going straight to the end and listen to the recording as many times as you want. I'm pretty wordy. Just use a piece of paper or something. If you go on WebSound, you might be able to access the activity and just not play the play the audio, and listen to my audio instead. About an hour and it might be helpful to listen to my audio and listen to the audio on WebSound. So again, as many different voices and cadences and stuff that you might hear from different people as possible will really help your audio comprehension. So, instant thing to change. Alors, vous allez écouter. Alors, et comme j'ai dit, vous pouvez jouer, vous pouvez faire passer l'enregistrement autant que possible, autant que vous voulez. And I'll bring you guys back in a second here play too. It as many times as you want to get the activity. Voilà. I'm finding it. Oops, I went too far. Attends, parce que j'ai le script là. J'ai le script. Alors c'est court. Hein. C'est le météo. Une question sur sa sœur. So, it's a weather report. Sa sœur. Vous avez les consignes, écoutez le bulletin météorologique plus âgé que sa sœur. En fait, tu dirais vieille. It's kind of like listen to, parce que normalement, âgé, c'est pour les gens âgés. So listen to pour les gens du troisième âge, seniors. A bunch of times if you need to, tandis que vieille is what we usually default to. You might be able to answer, but âgé is okay. This would be totally fine if you're basing it on communication success. That's wonderful. D'accord? Aujourd'hui, vendredi 21 mars, nous commençons le printemps avec une température de 11 degrés. Il n'y a pas de vent, mais il y a quelques nuages. Dr. Davidson and I were talking the other day actually about how in a perfect world we would just grade you guys on how successful your communication was. Because languages change so fast. And the rules, the so-called rules that we learn and tell you guys about really aren't rules, they're really symptoms. It's kind of like watching a herd of elephants. That's a good bit slower than normal normally speech. They come and drink at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so anytime we do these activities, conform don't with worry, the elephants. We're going to go have a drink at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's kind of what's happening with language. But I would like we look at French people and we say, well, normally they use these ones that we do during the class sessions. I'm probably going to go at a fairly good clip. Imparfait for this kind of a past expression. But again, that wasn't normal speed at all. So if I'm going to try to be understood the best if you by French people, a little bit of that, I better use it that way too. It's not really that somebody's standing around with a whip and saying, these are the grammar rules.
It's really
something I forgot to tell you
these
was
are the guidelines if
like
you
I
want
said
to be
before
understood.
with the video, if you read through the questions,
and there's
and
a lot
if
of
you read
stuff
them
that you
aloud,
guys
especially,
do in
that will help you
compositions
get
and
ready
in
to listen
activities
for what you need to
that
listen
would be
for, because a lot of the
fine
words in this
communication
question are the same
wise,
as what
and
you
a
hear
French
in
person
the
would totally have
right?
understood what you said.
So,
but we have to be
play that
pickier
as many
'cause
times as you want,
we're focusing on all the grammar and all the
try to do
craziness.
the activity.
So
Let me know how
anyway,
it goes if you
that's
like.
just a little aside.
And,
Hello.
I'll
Oh my
say
gosh,
these
I'm
announcements
tired
again.
tonight. When I'm tired, I digress a lot more. Alors, les
Basically,
plages de la Martinique.
I'm catching up as fast as I can.
Les plages
The
de la Martinique
composition
sont-elles-
module will
Attends, je
be
vais faire que
available
ça soit plus large aussi.
tomorrow night
Voilà.
or by early Thursday morning at the latest.
Sont-elles-
The
Alors,
quiz
remember,
will
we can't
be
say
available tomorrow
plus
night at the
bonne.
latest.
So what word
As
am
soon as I
gonna
finish
use
my
to
classes
replace this
tonight,
whole
I will
thing?
set up the websam, and
You guys
in
fell asleep
there
during my
and
digression.
everywhere I'll be
It's very
posting
sad
all the
putting
PowerPoints
people
and
to
scripts
sleep
and
during
links
class.
that I can.
Sad.
I have to rearrange a
Qu'est-ce que
few
j'ai
of those,
oublié
so
de plus bonne?
got a little confused
Any
earlier and had to
tickers?
stop. So I'm gonna get those straight
Alors,
and figure out which ones you guys need to look at this week.
Il faut que je glisse.
Voilà. And enjoy the week. You do have a
très
little
bien.
bit less
I forgot to glisser the
concentrate on
thing.
than you
There
did.
we go.
Quite a bit less than last
Oui, très bien.
week.
Alors, meilleur
And
avec
since all we
ES.
had were those numbers,
C'est super.
so
because
it should
as
be
we
a week
said,
when you can kind of stop and
meilleur
breathe a little
is
bit.
in fact an adjective.
And
Think of it
don't
as
worry
an
too much
adjective.
about
I'm
the
gonna make
composition.
Eveline,
When you see the
wow.
module,
Also you have
you'll be able to
être
read your
as your big,
topic
as one of your big
and all the
clues, right? That you're talking
parameters,
about
and
adjectives.
there's a lot of
Eveline
information there to
parle.
help you.
And of course
So
I'm here,
to
equal
help
sign.
you. So it's
Poliment.
not due until a week from Sunday.
Oh, and there's a
So
typo.
don't worry too much.
Actually,
you've got that
there's
coming
a typo
up,
in
but
every
you'll
single
be
one of these.
fine.
Oh, well,
Okay?
there's.
Alors, bonne soirée.
Oh, they want us to provide it.
À la
Never
prochaine.
mind.
Et
Don't forget
je
the
vais
que.
continuer
When you
avec
guys
les
do these,
mails
don't
ce
forget the
soir
que.
aussi. I'll be continuing with all my emails tonight too.
Oh, no.
Most of the ones that I
C'est
looked
ça,
at but didn't get to
quand même.
answer,
Typos,
people had
typos.
asked
C'est
questions
super,
that
c'est
I had
photo
actually
frappe,
answered
photo frappe.
in my big note
Yeah,
yesterday.
these weren't typos. These
So
were
if you're still waiting for an answer on something, as I said at the beginning,
not giving the activity everything that they
I will
wanted us
get
to
to
give
you.
it.
And if it's something that
Eveline
a grade is
parle.
depending
Qu'est-ce que vous allez me
on,
dire?
I will,
Elle
as long as you
parle.
wrote me in
So I
time
have
originally,
plus, moins, and aussi.
I will adjust your grade.
Aussi.
So you won't
Très
be
bien.
penalized
Aussi
for it
poliment que.
taking a long time for me to get back to you
C'est
about
très
your
bien,
question.
Rihanna.
So don't worry.
Que.
Voilà. Bonne
No
soirée.
agreement.
Salut
Because
Laura.
I've never made agreement on
Alors
adverbs,
je
and I'm not gonna
vais
start now. Les chaussettes
arrêter
sont.
déjà.
Qu'est-ce que vous me dites? Les
Just do
chaussettes
this.
sont.
That's easier. I gotta find the thing.
There it is.
Ah, bien.
Ça c'est vrai en plus.
Alors, arrêtez
Hein, les chaussettes
de
sont.
faire
Oh,
le
I
partage.
almost answered it. I do that a lot.
Stop.
Alors
Voilà.
les chaussettes.
Et puis, on va s'arrêter l'enregistrement aussi. Oui.
Recording stopped.
Minus, vous
Voilà.
allez mettre aussi moins ou plus.
Et je vais
Voilà,
partir.
très bien.
Alors,
Moins cher.
salut.
Oh, they're being really nice. They're going ahead and giving you some agreement. That's funny. Some of them they're making the agreement already for you, and some of them they're not. Anyway, that's kind of wacky. Alors, aussi, je veux dire, moins cher que les baskets. C'est ça. Oui, c'est chouette. C'est super chouette. Mais attention avec numéro 4, parce que là, fais gaffe. Ses sœurs sont aussi, moins, plus... Qu'est-ce que vous me dites? Très bien. Aussi généreux. Aussi généreux. Qu'est-ce que vous me dites pour la terminaison? L'accord. So this one, they're misleading us. Are they doing that on purpose? They're making that very tricky. I like it better when they just don't do any agreement and they make you guys decide. This is misleading because they're giving you agreement on some of them. Mais regarde ça. Who are we describing? Ses sœurs. C'est masculin ou féminin, les sœurs? Oui. Elles sont masculins ou féminins? Je veux dire, elles sont masculins ou féminines? Masculine ou féminine? Ça, c'est bizarre, dire féminine, masculine. Alors, eux, c'est masculin. Eux, c'est masculin. So, the feminine version of this is z. Féminine. Voilà, très bien. Généreuse. D'accord, c'est très bien. EUs are funky. Sometimes you've got SEs, sometimes you've got X's, and sometimes you've got R's. So it's kind of funny. La soupe est... Qu'est-ce que vous me dites? So this one, they didn't help you either. Ah, très bien. So I have two possibilities. Pire. And what else? Pire que... Ou qu'est-ce que vous me dites pour l'autre possibilité? So I can actually say the other one if I want to. So go ahead and use the adjective they're giving us. Although we'll talk about that in a second. Moins. Qu'est-ce que vous me dites pour bon avec la soupe? Alors, elle est moins... Elle est moins... That's really interesting that you guys' heads want to go the other direction with this. And that's okay. That's a really interesting point. We'll talk about it in a second. If I'm going to use the same adjective, I'm just going to use bon. But what am I going to do since it's puisque c'est féminin? Moins bonne. D'accord? Moins bonne. Ok? Alors, non, c'est bon, hein? C'est pas grave du tout. C'est pas du tout grave. Alors, in fact, I kind of helped to mislead you because of pire. So pire is the same as plus mauvais, but it's not necessarily the same as moins bon. Okay? And this is what I was going to mention, is that in some situations, we would have to just go by context and know exactly, you know, what is going on with the soup. If there might be some situations where it would be just as true to say moins bonne as plus mauvaise. D'accord? But there would be other situations where I would definitely choose one over the other. Okay? So, you know, just like in English, if I wanted to say, well, this is worse than that, the assumption is that they're both a little bad, at least, right? Or this one's better than that one. The assumption is that the one isn't necessarily bad, it's just not as good as the second one, right? Or as the first one. So that's going to just depend on the situation. Sometimes they will be interchangeable, but a lot of the time, if you use the wrong one, it's putting an extra little nuance onto the sentence that you maybe didn't want. Now, in terms of communication, like that stuff that Dr. Davidson and I were talking about, that wouldn't make that much difference. It's a pretty fine line. But it's really interesting that that we wanna use those interchangeably, even though in English we don't use them interchangeably either. Alors, très bien. Quelle heure il est? 21h10. On va quand même commencer avec une autre activité parce que c'est assez important de pratiquer tout ça. They have one here that's specifically focusing on your bon and biens and all that. Okay, so let's do as much of this one as we can cram into 5 or so minutes. And then I'm gonna go, still gonna do that audio for you. Joseph and Brianna, you guys don't have to stick around for that unless you want to. But it won't hurt my feelings if you don't. If you want to, you totally can. But you guys and those of you who are watching the video later, don't forget it's going to be right at the end, so you can replay it as many times as you need to do the activity. Alors, voilà. Complétez les phrases avec bon, bien, meilleur ou mieux. Now, remember, I gave you a couple of key clues about when to use bon and meilleur versus bien and mieux. Bon and meilleur, I'm normally going to have être in the sentence, or in this case, you'll be able to look at the other part of the cue and see whether there's agreement or not, and that'll be another clue to you as to whether you're talking about the adjective or the adverb. Alors, voilà. J'ai bien mangé au café du marché hier. D'accord? So, bien, I'm focusing on bien, and we're talking about how well or not well we ate. So this is an action, and this is one thing that you can do when you're doing the WebSam, at least when you first start in, is to stop and really dissect them for just a second to make yourself really stop and acknowledge whether you're talking about an adjective or an adverb situation, n'est-ce pas? Alors, nous avons très bien. Nous avons mieux mangé, because that's my counterpart to bien. And look at where we're placing this. If you go back and review your adverbs, which I didn't go back and get those lesson numbers, so I will, and I'll put them on the module, hopefully, if my crazy brain lets me. Doesn't forget. The placement is just like the placement for the normal adverbs. So you had a set little list of adverbs way back when you did adverbs that we said go right after the conjugated verb when you're doing passé composé, and the same thing's going to happen with mieux. It's going to go where bien would have gone, right? Nous avons mieux mangé chez Charles. Le vin blanc au café du marché est blablabla. Oui, mais le vin blanc de chez Charles est meilleur. This time they've done it backwards, right? Le vin blanc de chez Charles est meilleur. What's the counterpart to meilleur? And you're just kind of toggling back and forth between each set up here, right? Meilleur. So part of why this particular activity is confusing is the way that they have this formatted up here. It would be better if they gave you something like this and said bon, pardon. So that you had the two pairs that belong together next to each other. So if you think about those as your choices for each one, and each pair of expressions or sentences is going to toggle between the two. So the first one, j'ai bien mangé, and now I'm making the comparative mieux, d'accord? I already have the comparative here, so what's the counterpart to meilleur if I'm not doing the comparative in the first part? That probably was more confusing. So bien is the counterpart to, voilà, bien is the, get out of the way. Bien is the counterpart to mieux, bon is the counterpart to meilleur, and you're just going to toggle between the two parts of each pair for each one of these. D'accord? Alors, oh, qu'est-ce que, voilà, je vais faire que ça, de sorte que ça reste, voilà. Alors, bon, voilà. Très bien. Le vin blanc au café du marché est bon, mais le vin blanc de chez Charles est meilleur. Mes amis ont bien aimé le café du marché. Oui, mais mes amis ont... And they've changed this one up a little bit. They've got two different verbs, but it's still both adverb situations. Voilà. Ils ont mieux mangé chez Charles. D'accord? Au café du marché, le chef prépare, le poulet. Oui, mais le chef de chez Charles le prépare mieux. Voilà, très bien. D'accord? And the cool thing about this activity is that it's supernatural. I didn't mean to make a pun there. This is very, very, very much like you would see these used in a sentence or in a conversation. So, it's really, really natural French is what I mean. Alors, voilà, c'est très bien. So keep practicing those. I know a couple of you were pretty excited about text last week. I looked at their activities, and they do have some pretty good activities for comparative and superlative. Also, they have a pretty good, actually, let's go ahead and look at that really quickly. They have a really good description of the bon, meilleur, bien, mieux thing. And they have pretty good descriptions of the comparative and superlatives of both adjectives and adverbs. So what I said last week is still true. And I'll probably say it all semester and drive you guys crazy. But anytime you just need to kind of reinforce something, or you just need a different perspective on something, text is a good place for that, and there's some other sites also that I'll kind of present to you periodically. But it's totally fine to go look at information on a different site, and they might present something just slightly different so that it'll click a little bit better. And in some cases, in many cases, our book may click better than something you find online. But don't be afraid to use these extra tools. Also, just seeing something in a totally different format and in a totally different context can help kind of clinch things for you, or just make it less boring to be studying this stuff. So, voila. So I will try very hard to remember to add all of those links as well to the page, to the module, so that everybody can go enjoy text. I lost you guys. There we go. Voilà. Alors, écoutez si vous voulez. Again, those of you who are listening to this later, you can cue straight to this thing then on this particular recording anytime you want, in order to practice some audio comprehension. Voila. So if you want to, go ahead and go to your vText or and click on that, or use a piece of paper if you like, or whatever. And as I said, you might want to pause the video now and read through these sentences just to kind of refresh your memory, because a lot of the same verbiage is going to be in the audio script. So again, it kind of gets your head ready for the context. D'accord? Also, I'm going to be reading this at a pretty good clip, still not natural speed, but a good bit faster than I'll be doing on the tests and quizzes. So please don't let these activities scare you. I want you to have to reach a little higher on these, on the tests and quizzes. Anytime I'm doing audio, I'll be going pretty slowly. So, voila. That's enough of me talking about that stuff. And now, I'm going to find the script and read the audio for you. Voilà. Alors, celui-là, this one's a tiny bit longer than some of them. So again, pause the video if you want to read through your questions, and then you can play the audio as many times as you want, and rewind and everything, until you can just try to get as many of the questions answered correctly as possible. So let's look at the directions. Catherine est au régime. Elle parle de ses habitudes alimentaires. Écoutez et indiquez si les affirmations suivantes sont vraies ou fausses. D'accord? Catherine is au régime. That's a diet. And she's talking about what she eats. So based on what you hear, are these statements vrais ou fausses? D'accord? Alors c'est Catherine qui parle. Catherine is speaking. Je suis au régime, alors je ne peux pas manger beaucoup de desserts ou bien de pain en général. Parfois, je vais à la boulangerie et j'achète des croissants pour le petit déjeuner, mais je les prends sans confiture. Quand je mange une salade, je n'utilise jamais d'huile d'olive. Je fais très attention à ce que je mange et je ne mets pas trop de sel dans mes plats. J'utilise très peu de poivre parce que je n'aime pas beaucoup ça. Chaque semaine, quand je fais les courses, je vais à la boulangerie pour acheter du pain. Pour les fruits et les légumes, je vais au marché. Je vais rarement au supermarché. Je préfère aller chez les commerçants parce que le service est très agréable. Je ne vais jamais ni à la boucherie ni à la poissonnerie parce que je viens de devenir végétarienne. Fin. D'accord? Alors vous pouvez repasser l'enregistrement autant de fois que vous voulez pour que vous puissiez mieux comprendre, mieux répondre aux questions. Et puis voilà. So the announcements that I had at the beginning. As soon as we're done with this class, I'm going to go set up WebSound. The composition module will probably not be available until Thursday morning. The quizzes, of which you have two, one is from last week because I messed up, and it will be counted as extra credit. If you do it, it will help your average in the end because obviously, the more quizzes you have, the better the drops will work. And the quizzes at the beginning of the semester tend to have slightly higher scores, at least, than ones towards the end, just because, again, of the cumulative nature of what we're studying. So that is that. If you want to do it, you need to do it by Sunday night, just like the one for this week. The one for this week is not optional, and it is due Sunday night as usual. But those will both be available tomorrow night sometime. As for the composition, don't worry. Well, you guys are in 201, so you saw how they were in 102, unless somebody's new to our courses. If you are new to our courses, don't worry. You're going to see the module. The module is going to give you lots and lots of information and lots of tools. And next week is just the rough draft. It'll be due Sunday the 6th or whatever that is. And you'll be fine. It'll be great. Don't worry. Just write and try to have fun and try to just express yourself, and yay! That's what a rough draft is for. Do try to stick to the parameters of the assignment, but beyond that, try your best just to say what you want to say. Et puis, en dehors de ça, I'll also have various PowerPoints and scripts and links and stuff on there as soon as I possibly can. How long is the composition? I cannot remember how long you guys' is. Let me think. I think the 102 one, the first one, I think is just 100 words or maybe 125 words, and you guys' might be 150 for the first one. It's not very long. I like to keep them a little shorter than some other people like to keep them because I don't want you guys to feel overwhelmed by just having to load tons of text on there. I'd rather you have something smaller to chew on so that you can really work on it and try to make it as clear and as communicative as you can, rather than just trying to write as much as you can to meet a word quota. So it's not very long. I just can't remember off the top of my head how long it is. So, voilà. Alors, très bien. Y a-t-il d'autres questions? I will look up those adverb pages, adverb lessons as well. I kind of forgot to do that. I used to always do that before each lesson, so we would kind of have a little
corner of the course management page where it was like, hey, for this week's stuff, go review this, this, this. So I'll try to start doing that again. I haven't done that for a couple years, but it's a really good idea. So we'll start doing that again. Et puis voilà. Alors, c'est très bien. Let me know, especially, vous êtes si mignon, vous. Alors, let me know, those of you who listen to the video and those of you who attend, my feeling from Dr. Davidson was that a lot of English explanation should be in the video. However, if you don't need this much English, I would be happy to have more French in it. I know that for the grammar stuff in particular, that's going to be better for us to talk about the nitty-gritty in English, and plus our PowerPoints are in English, but if there's more French that can be inserted and you guys would like to have in there, it's still pretty good listening practice, even if I'm just babbling, which I tend to do. So, obviously. So, voilà. Alors, yeah, I will try to get more French in there. Also, there's a couple of videos that I had planned as just like little extra credit things. I just haven't quite figured out how to use them. And what I could do is do those in French as well. So those will be on YouTube eventually. Just if you want to, Brianna, keep reminding me about those. But I'll narrate those in French, and you guys can do something with that. Also, a lot of the time we're going to have music videos and stuff to watch. I just couldn't really find one for the stuff that we were doing tonight, so that I thought fit very well. So yeah, everybody needs to work on that. Audio comprehension is one of the hardest things, especially when we're not face-to-face, actually. You guys have a little tougher row to hoe than you would if we had a live classroom, because body language and everything helps you understand people enormously, way more than we think it does. So, voilà. Très bien. Alors, bonne soirée. Let me know anything you need. Oh, and also, those of you who still have emails pending, most of the ones that I saw that I haven't answered yet had questions which were answered by my ginormous note yesterday. The few that had questions that didn't have to do with that, if you have a question that's pending and there's a grade depending on it, do not worry, we will adjust the grade. I'm not going to penalize you for my delay. So don't worry. Okay? Voilà. Oh, voice board. Be sure and use it with Firefox. I think it works best with Firefox. But shoot me an email if you want to, Joseph. I really am going to be on my email consistently. Yeah, thank you, Brianna. I couldn't remember for sure. Also, don't forget, this thing is going to cut me out in a second. Don't forget that if you have stuff open on your desktop already, it'll sometimes just open and be hiding behind stuff. That's what happened to me a couple times last semester. And beyond that, be sure and yell to IT or to D2L and get some tips from them if you're having a hard time. Ooh, that's really cool. Oh, I should have French versions of all my browsers. Ah, every self-respecting French teacher should have all of their browsers in the French version. Come on. That's really cool. I might do that. Alors, c'est très bien. Alors, bonne soirée. Merci d'être venu. C'est super avoir des gens. Hein. It's so much just cooler for me when you guys are in class, when there's at least one person on the other side of the, the other side of the ether. So, yay. Thank you so much for coming. Et puis, voilà. Yeah, I'll tell you guys one more
really short story is that I taught English in Japan for a year, ages and ages ago. And I had just gotten my first Windows computer. I had had DOS up until then. This really was a long time ago. And anyway, I only had a couple weeks to learn the Windows stuff before I went to Japan. And so I learned it as best I could. And then when I went to Japan, the stuff that I did at school, I was working on the school computer. And it had Windows. And it was the same version as my version. But everything was in Japanese. And occasionally, or more than occasionally at the beginning, I would mess up a document or something and have no idea what to do to fix it because I couldn't read anything on the keyboard except the Roman character, you know, the normal Roman characters. I couldn't read any of the commands. I couldn't read any of the menus on Windows. So I would go home at night and try to recreate the mistake. And then I would memorize how to fix it. And I'd be like, okay, 4th tab over, pull it down, and choose the 3rd thing in the row, and then I can fix this thing. And it was absolutely ridiculous. It really did make me learn Windows really well. It got really automatic after a while. Anyway, that's really fun to be working on totally different keyboards. Something similar to that happened to me in France one time too, because their keyboards are a little bit different. Anyway, voilà, that's the last digression. Alors, bonne soirée et à la prochaine. Salut! Je vais arrêter le share, le partage. Où est le partage? Oh, il faut que je fasse ça avant de pouvoir faire le partage. À la prochaine, Brianna. À la prochaine, Joseph. Au revoir. Stop. Très bien. Et puis, je vais arrêter l'enregistrement. Oui.
Recording stopped.
Très bien. And now I'm going to turn off Camtasia, so those of you who are still watching the video, this is probably really, really interesting.